Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to the modding of Isaac with Lyte. Today, we're going to revisit two old mods, Lorem and Magidingle. Magidingle's not quite so old, but it's been a while since we worked with Lorem, and there was one thing that I did leave a bit hanging, and that was the portraits. How to get them in there, how to make them show up properly, and how to get them to interact with bosses. And with Magidingle, we never made him a real boss. Poor little Pinocchio Magidingle just sitting there being bait and switched into random rooms. Well now, through a bit of smoke and mirrors, I have added him as a real boss, with a real boss room, with a real boss item pool. Now some of this I've shown you how to do, but this is just bringing it all together into a relatively cohesive whole. So let's get started. I'm here at the pause screen because I didn't want to waste your time getting to the boss room. So I'm gonna get in here, get going. Here we are as Lorem. Nice tentacle-y face. We got Magic Mush and Fat Odd Mushroom. And we're good to face this boss. And all we do is walk through the door. And it's Magidingle with a portrait and everything. And here he is with his own room. Like, this is not an ordinary boss room. So let's show him what for while he teleports around the room. Occasionally shoots some TNT. Oh no, go summoning those bonies again. So he still has the AI he had the last time you saw him. He teleports behind you, he summons bonies, he shoots fire at you. And then when he dies, hey look, he dropped Spoonbender. It's not a normal boss room item. If we hold R, start back over, Lorem, I have him starting with Magic Mush just such that the murder goes a whole lot quicker, and then we hit the Emperor card. Teleports us in, we get this, and if you hit space, poof, it all goes away just the way it's supposed to. And now we're here on the cellar, but if we get, say, the burning basement, he's got a different little thing underneath of him on this screen, and his room is still the same. No matter where you go, he keeps following you. There's a 100% chance of him showing up right now, but you would want to fine-tune that a bit. This is just for demonstration purposes. But no matter what boss was supposed to be here, Magidingle's here instead. So let's head over to the code. Let's see how to make all of this happen. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is still smoke and mirrors. I'm not guaranteeing it will always work, and I'm not guaranteeing it's always going to be the way we have to do this. But for the moment, if you desperately want your boss in the game to be a real boss, this will at least kind of do it. So let's head over to the code. It's quite a lot to cover, so strap in. We got two old mods, Lorem Ipsum on the left, Magidingle on the right. We've only added a very tiny amount to Lorem. So if you go into the content and players.xml, we changed a couple of things in here, but only superficially. We just changed the name of the big portrait file, we changed the name image file, and we changed the portrait file. So each of these you can find in your resources folder to see what they look like for the other characters, and then you can modify it for yours. Where you find them is where you put them, unless you change these parameters up here. These tell you where to look for them. So the big portrait root tells you that your big portrait, player portrait big c1 lorem.ping, is in resources /gfx/ui/stage. It's important, that resources part, because you're going to be tempted to put it in content, because that's where you have players.xml, but that's not where the XML files reference. Everything here is going to be relative to the resources folder. So if we head back in here, if we go into Lorem Ipsum resources GFX UI stage, here's our big portrait. And there he is. That's him crying when he was faced with Magidingle. The other portraits are used for different purposes, but if you go into UI and boss, it might not have been the big portrait. It might have just been the regular portrait. Yeah, it might have just been this tiny one. And then the name. But these are what are used when you're fighting against bosses. If they're... I think the big one might be for the stage transitions, actually. But either way, what you set up in players.xml references resources. You follow the routes that you set in the file, and then you give it the file name. You make sure it's in there. Now, I'm having both mods active at the same time to show you that you need to think about cross-mod compatibility. Because yes, you can make it work great for all the vanilla characters, but if it doesn't work for the modded ones, what good was doing it in the first place? And you can't always assume that it should only work with your modded characters, because you can make it work with your modded characters, fine. But what about mine? Always gotta think these things through. So that's all I really did to Lorem. I just added those portraits. That's all there really is to it. Magidingle, on the other hand, a bit of work was put into this to make sure it does exactly what it should. So let's open up Magidingle's main.lua and go over what things are different. Now, I might not remember to cover all of the things that are different in here, but I will cover at least the most important bits. So, I don't recall if Magidingle trigger was here before, but I'm fairly certain it wasn't. Along with Magidingle encountered, pretty much all of this up top probably wasn't here before. Magidingle chance is saying, what's the probability that on that floor you encounter a Magidingle? As opposed to famine or monster or anybody. It's always going to be a bait and switch until we get a true way of doing it. So these odds are between 0 and 1, 1 being 100% chance. Current stage and boss visited is checking whether or not you've actually encountered a boss yet on this stage, because even if you don't summon Magidingle, you're gonna want to not try to summon him the next time you come in the room. And some of the things that figure out what's going on aren't necessarily as quick as one would like. So you might be able to get away with first time visited for the boss room, supposing you don't check it at a time where it doesn't know. That's the biggest problem we have with this, is that the versus screen triggers before you can update the room. Or, well, before the room is updated. So you do a little bit of magic to make it work. So here we define the versus screen. So this we're going to have to look at. This is not just a quick little thing where, oh, I just replace what they've got. No, this one's interesting. So what we're going to do, we're going to come over in here. We're going to go into Tools, go into the animation editor, and take a look at this file. So, good old file open. This one is in Magidingle because it's necessary for the boss. I don't remember if it's in content or resources. So we just come back over here and go, which would this reference? Well, if it doesn't say, it probably looks in your resources. So we come into resources, GFX, UI, boss, custom versus screen.anim2. So I did take the original the original versus screen to modify, because when you've got something to work with, you might as well use it. I didn't include frame, I didn't include player spot, player portrait, player name, or double trouble. You can implement the double trouble if you want double trouble bosses, but for me, I just wanted to get one boss working, and we can't interact with the player. We don't know that we'll have access to the player's resources. We don't know that we've got access to the player portrait. So we can't just assume we've got it. I can't access Lorem from Magidingle. Two separate mods, they're sandboxed, they're protected from one another. So what do? We cheat. When in doubt, cheat. So what we've got here, let's zoom out a little bit. Oh, I really do not like trying to move this thing with the mouse, because my third mouse button doesn't necessarily strictly exist. So I'm trying to click a mouse wheel, and it's quite often frustrating. But I think you get the point. What we have here is just the right side. We black out whatever is supposed to be happening on the right side. Animate in the verses, because why not? Well, mainly, we do it because the verses overlaps this name. If the player name is long enough, this might not work. It might cover up a little bit of the player name. I haven't tried it with players with long names, but I know the verses overlaps with Majidingle over here, so I keep this part, animate the verses in, animate the Majidingle on the side, but everything on the left is as the game intends, because we can add players legitimately. No smoke and mirrors. They're just there. And so they're in this transparent bit on the left. We cover up that it really wants us to be fighting Famine or Pin or Monstro. And we say we're fighting Majidingle. So that's this anim2 file. It doesn't really matter which portrait you give it, because you can swap out these sprite sheets. It very much doesn't matter which boss spot you use, because we are going to be swapping that out, depending on which floor we're on. The verses, yeah, you just bring in the verses. The name, again, you can swap that out at runtime. So if you have multiple bosses, you can still use this same anim2 file. Just takes a slight alteration to the code. You'll load in your boss sprite sheets for each of these layers. And you'll see how to do that, because we're going to have to do it for the boss spot. So if you're worried that you've got multiple bosses and you don't know how to make this work, pay particular attention to how we swap out the boss spot. So we set that up once. We grab the versus screen. I set the playback speed to 0.5 because we're going to update it in the render callback, but we wanted to run at 30 FPS. Just wanted to show you a different way of doing it, because last time for the runes, we updated it in the update callback instead of the render callback to get the 30 FPS. Here, another way to do it. The boss splash position, it's a constant. We're saying vector 320, 280, such that it lines up perfectly with the normal one from vanilla. We set up a Majidingle pool, just like we did with Dongle. We have a roll of the die. Half the time you get Spoonbender. 30% of the time you get Telepathy for Dummies. And the rest of the time you get the Whiz. It's the dunce cap. Because they're all slightly magic-y, but kind of messed up items. Spoonbender, super magic-y. Telepathy for Dummies, he's not so great at magic. The Whiz, he thinks he's magic. So this function, you just give it an RNG object. It returns what it should return for that boss fight. The following code is straight from the Majidingle episode. If you haven't watched that, please do. It's on the state-based AI for bosses. We're using a Markov chain here to do random stuff. Markov transitioning from state to state. Majidingle update. I added one line here for Majidingle current such that it uses the boss pool correctly. If you missed that episode, that's back with Dongle, with the custom item pools for bosses. I'm not sure what else I did with Dongle, but you can head back to that episode if you don't know how that boss pool works. Here's how we implemented the state-based AI for Majidingle. None of this has changed. He still works the exact same way he used to. And that's the Majidingle update function. On regular update, I've got first frame things. We say we haven't visited the boss yet. Brilliant. We set the current stage to be game get level get stage, current stage, because we want to be able to change things when we change rooms or when we change stages. This should not be here, because this is for any change of room. We want to change boss visited when we change stages. So every now and then you look at code and go, hey, that's not right. So we just make a little modification, Now, instead of whenever we change a room, it's when we change a stage. Magic current can still swap around. That we don't necessarily need to worry about if it's by room or by stage. Boss visited, we want it by stage. Again, this is not perfect code. This is not designed to be a boss for the second room of Curse of the Labyrinth stage. Haven't done enough to make that happen, but this is for learning. This is to make it just basically functional. So this is just basic on update code. We're good to go. You check on the end of the room, check on the end of the level. Now we're getting to the really fun stuff that actually happens on render. Because we need these things to be highly synchronized and not visible, even for a single frame. You don't want any of this stuff to go pear-shaped on you. So what we do in this render is anything that needs interaction with the screen. And you'd think some of this wouldn't, but a lot of it does. So we get a lot of just basic configuration objects first. We get the level from game, get level. We get the stage from level, get stage. We get the stage type from the level, get stage type. So every stage has a couple of different types. So the first pair of floors, you've got the basement from the original. You've got the cellar from Wrath of the Lamb, and you've got the burning cellar or burning basement, whatever, from Afterbirth. So the stage is the same for all three of those, but the stage type is different. Now, do you need it? Maybe not. But if you want your particular boss to only show up in the burning basement, you're going to need this stage type. So I put it here just to keep it in your mind. You need the room, so game, get room. And for now, we need a dice for certain things, because we want to seed the chance of getting a Magidingle as the boss. So we get an RNG object and we set the seed. What this does is just wherever you happen to be, you get the spawn seed for wherever that is. So the boss room, where you get the Magidingle, you get the spawn seed, and that determines whether or not that Magidingle will show up when you're on that seeded run. In theory, haven't done rigorous testing, but in theory, that's how it should work. Now, you need to decide, okay, do we need to trigger Magidingle code now? It's a complicated thing, a little. So, a few of these things are completely optional. Some of these are configurable. Some of them are indispensable. So first, we ask, is the stage 1-1? So this is an enumeration. You're checking if the stage, which we got up here, from the level, which we got from the game, is the stage 1-1. That's the only place I want Magidingle to show up. There are bosses that only show up in certain places, and so you want to make sure they're appearing at the right part of the run. I wanted 1-1 so I can easily show you. But you might want yours only on 1-2, only on 2-2, only on 3-1. Choose where you want them to be and make sure that's the only place you spawn them. Then you check if the room is a boss room. Well, clearly. Then you get the room shape. I get the room shape because I only want him to show up in a normal 1x1 room. I don't want a narrow room that's wide. I don't want a narrow room that's tall. I don't want one that's too long because it was a double trouble room. I just want a nice, normal 1x1 room. If you don't care, then don't care. But if you care, this is how you do it. This is another enumeration. It has all the different room shapes in there. All of the L's, all of the narrow ones, all of them. So you ask the room, what shape are you? Make sure it's the shape you want. Then, if we haven't visited a boss yet, because we can enter the stage 1 boss room that's 1x1 multiple times, but we only want this to happen the first time. And we haven't encountered one already. Now this one is mostly superfluous. It's not really necessary. But if somehow you encountered a Magidingle as just somebody in a room somewhere on that floor. You probably don't want to fight him as the boss, too. That just doesn't seem right to me. Then we roll a die. If the die fail passes and everything else is passed, great. Remember, ands short circuit. So you want to put the least likely thing first, such that you don't have to check any of the others. Now, determining which of these things is least likely is a little bit difficult, but I went for the stage first, because a lot of the game is not on stage 1-1. But maybe boss rooms are less likely. Maybe. Room shape 1-1, that's pretty common. You don't want that to be first. Not boss visited, pretty common. Not encounter Magidingle, pretty common. Now, if your Magidingle chance is really low, you might put that first. But this seems like a good order to me, and you're not going to save a whole lot of time by short-circuiting this efficiently, but you might. If you have a lot of these to check, probably want to try to do them efficiently. So if all of those things pass, then it's Magidingle time. You set that you visited a boss, you set that you've encountered a Magidingle, and you set that you have triggered Magidingle. Now, you will need a little bit of extra code that I clearly forgot to put in here. You need to detect when you've gotten into a boss room, but not encountered Magidingle. That would probably go as an else if down here. So let's put that in. No sense leaving it out. So, if you're in a boss room, you have encountered the boss. Good job, you. There you go. And then whenever you change stage, up here, somewhere around here. Yeah, whenever you change stage, boss visited goes back to false. Okay? So sometimes we forget things, and we put them all in. So if you visit and run into Magidingle, you have visited the boss. If you're in the boss room, but it wasn't Magidingle, you still visited the boss. Okay? Counter Magidingle, great. Triggered, true. This is for triggering the graphics. So the splash screen, the versus screen, whatever you want to call it, this is what triggers it. It's what makes it show up. Then you initialize the versus screen. So, stage type. Oh, we did need that stage type. If it's original, then it's the basement. So you replace the sprite sheet number 2. Which one's number 2? You come back in here and you look, boss spot is layer 2. You look over on this left side and that tells you which layer it is. And that's which layer you replace the sprite sheet up. So we replace the boss spot sprite sheet with gfx boss spot 01 basement.ping. So we come back over into Magidingle, we realize in resources gfx boss, we've got all of the boss spots. You don't necessarily need all of them if your boss can only show up in the first 3, but I grabbed all of them just in case. You need these to be able to load them. I think you might be able to get away with it not having them here, but I don't trust it. I just don't trust it. So I put them there just to be safe. So that's if it's original. These are enumerations, once again. Stage type we got from up here, level get stage type. Original, Wrath of the Lamb is the cellar, and then Afterbirth is the burning basement. You replace the sprite sheet such that the bit under Magidingle looks right. This else should never happen. So we put in a little debug string saying invalid stage type and then tells me what kind it is. If somehow there is a stage type that is not one of these 3. It's important that you load the graphics after you replace the sprite sheet, or else it'll still look the same as it always did. And then you play scene. Why scene? That's what it says here. Double Trouble is different. Scene is what we worked with. Scene is what looks right. So we've initialized it, we set the boss spot, and we have played it. That's not the only thing that happens, dear friends. We also changed his room, and we changed him. All we've done to this point is walked into a room that has famine in it. I know I keep saying famine. It could be Pin, could be Monstro, but it's a room that is not Magidingles. So we have to make him claim his domain. So we do it in a couple of steps. Step 1, clear the room. There are several ways of doing this too. Beautiful thing about programming, you can do it how you like. This I've written to demonstrate to you an easier way to understand it. So what we do is we go y equals 1 to the room get grid height. So the grid on the floor where any given grid entity, rock, barrel, whatever, can be, has a certain number of grid elements up and down, and then we subtract 2 from that. Okay? And then for x is 1 to get grid width minus 2. So the y and the x, we're looping over each one individually. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then y equals 2. X equals 1, 2, blah, 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 and then y equals 3. And we go basically across the first row, and then across the second, across the third, fourth, and so on down the room. Then we get the grid ID by taking y from 1 to whatever, multiplying it by room get grid width, and then add x to it. So you start in the upper left, and then you add 1 each time you go to the right, and then when you return to the next line, it's just 1 higher. Do you follow? So we start up in the corner going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. And then once we're out of that row, we come to the next row and just keep counting up. Just keep counting up. Just keep counting up. So you could just make this a loop that just goes. I'm not 100% certain if it starts at 0, 1, but I'm pretty sure it starts at 0. Why do I do it like this? Well, because I want to ignore the walls. And that's why we start at 1 and end at 2 before this width. Because it skips the first one and it skips the last one. Because that's the wall. And if you remove the wall, weird things happen. Because you can destroy those walls. Kind of freaks it out a little. You can walk into the walls and it tries to clip you back. It's just don't do it. Make sure you don't destroy the walls. So we get this grid ID, and then we grab a grid entity. Room get grid entity, grid ID. So we take this number and we grab that grid entity. You can also do this by position. So if you want to know what your character is standing on, you can do get grid entity from POS, POS, and it'll get the grid entity from a particular position. You've handed a vector, like player.position, and it'll give you the grid entity, if there is one. No rocks, no barrels, no webs, it returns null. Nil, still getting used to that. So you have to check. If the grid entity exists, then you can do something. In this case, we are removing the grid entity. Grid ID is saying which one. This one, it's unclear its purpose. You might be able to get away with saying 0. I use 1 and it works great. And then this false is saying whether or not to keep the decoration that was there. I want this room completely bare. Sometimes there are fancy little decorations, little webs and worms and stuff. You can leave them in. I use false just because I want it completely empty. So this loop goes over the entire room, minus the walls, and destroys everything in its sights. Because we want a clean slate when building the room back up. Then, for entity in pairs Isaac get room entities, we've done this several times. Loop over every entity in the room, including the player, if the type is greater than 5. So it's not a player, it's not a familiar, it's not a pickup. It's not a tier. It's not a projectile might be 7. But anything that's in the room that is not a player, because you can remove the player. Not a pickup, not a familiar. Get rid of it. Because we don't want that boss anymore. Poof, they're all gone. Then we do something incredibly important. This could cause you no end of headaches. You have to update the room after you remove the grid entities. If you don't update the room before removing the grid entities, when you add one in, it'll have the collision, but it won't have the sprite. You'll have a bunch of invisible rocks that you can't walk over, but you can shoot over. It's a weird thing. So make sure that after you've removed the grid entities, you update the room. I also put the removal of the entities before the room update, because then you don't get the puff of smoke of them appearing and disappearing. By putting them before this update, you don't see a thing when you enter the room. It's as if it was just a normal room to begin with. So now that we've cleared everything out, we need to add things back in. So we add things to the room. Room, spawn, grid entity. I think you kind of saw that one coming. You tell it which grid ID to use. You could make a helper function that converts X and Y into these grid IDs. Probably worth doing. Then you tell it what to spawn. This is another enumeration. Grid entity type dot grid TNT. There's also grid rock. There's grid web. Actually, let's go and take a look at that. Enumerations. Grid entity type. Grid entity type. Here we are. All sorts of things. Decorations, rocks, rock bomb, hits, spikes, spikes on off. TNT, fireplace, poop. All sorts of fun things. So you come in here, grid entity, type dot one of these, and it'll make it. This number I'm not certain of. So let's take a look. When in doubt, consult the documentation. It has everything you need here. It just might be a little enigmatic about what it is that it does. We want room. And then down around here, spawn grid entity. So where? What? Oh, the variant, because you can have variants of these various things. I think for orientation, like rocks that are connected to other rocks, pits that are connected to pits. Then the seed for, you know, tinted rocks and whatnot. And then this var data, I don't know what it does. I really don't. I have not gotten it to do anything interesting, so I just give it a 1 and it's fine. We'll look into that in the future. And then we spawn in Magidingle. No variant, no subtype. Where? Right in the middle. No velocity, no spawner. And then we update the room again, just for good measure, really. I don't think either of these needs the update, but after the weird behavior I was getting from removing entities and adding entities without updates, I'm being safe with the update. I was crashing the game in an XML sort of way, full crash with some of these things, until I got all the updates in good places, all the removes and adds nice and squared away. And that's how you get the room to exist with Magidingle in it and the room laid out the way you want it. Because if you try to update the special rooms, boom, game crashes. Until we get that fixed, we can't add new boss rooms. And even if we do have it fixed and adding new boss rooms, who knows if we can actually say where they should happen. It's a whole other big old mess. But for now, we've got at least a smoke and mirrors solution. And then here we have boss splash update. So we told it to play up here. Update tells it to move to the next frame. So it actually starts playing. So we got a little bit more to go. We're only 34 minutes in. Still good. So if Magidingle trigger, like I was saying, that was keeping track of whether or not we're playing the splash screen. So if it's finished, then we're done. Get rid of the trigger. We're done. Otherwise, for I is 0 to get layer count. So we're counting how many layers are in this animation. The 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on each layer, we render that layer in that order, such that they're stacked properly. So we take the boss splash, render layer 0 at world to render position, boss splash _ pause. And then we do layer 1, and then layer 2, and then layer 3, and so on up the line. We render all of the layers at this position, such that it all lines up with what the game is rendering. Okay? But what happens if they skip it? Well, we got that accounted for. If the input action is action menu confirm. So it's not the active button, that's the spacebar for the keyboard users, but it's not the same way on the controller. You don't hit the active item button to skip the animation. You use the X button on a PlayStation controller, so it's the menu confirm button. It's hitting OK on a menu. So if you see that happen, immediately remove the trigger. Cancel the animation, move on. So we cancel it if it's done. We cancel it if the player cancels it. So this input is really handy. You ask, did they confirm something on a menu? Because that is just the button they use to skip the cutscene. Controller 0 is the first player. You're good to go. Then the item pool is just the code from the dongle mod. If you don't know how this works, go rewatch that episode. You're just seeing, was this a Magidingle room? Is it now dead? Is there now an item to swap out? That's all there is. I know that was a lot. There's a lot of code here. But again, this is still just one boss. It's not a lot of code. It's just a lot of code for one episode. So you need to break it down into each of the little things that needs to happen, and you make sure it happens at the right time. And when timing is like down to the frame, you do it on render. A lot of these things need to be to the frame. So you need to make sure everything's swapped out and brought back super fast. You need to make sure all the graphical things are gone. You need to make sure your splash screen is perfectly timed with the original. You can't get that sort of precision in the update callback. It runs at half the speed. So always check the criteria for when you want your boss to show up. Make sure you set up the entire smoke and mirrors exactly how it should be. It's based on not just the floor, but the variant of the floor. I know they don't call it a variant, but it is one. Trying to recap all this, there's so much going on, so much here, but it's so useful. This is for the item pool. Again, item pool. Here is all the code it takes to make the sprite for the versus screen. Again, over here, we blacked out everything that was the original boss, replaced it with ours. And if you wanted to swap out the sprite sheet for your boss, if you've got multiple possible bosses, right here where you change their boss spot, you do the same thing. You replace the sprite sheet, but instead of layer 2, you do layer 3 and replace that sprite sheet with your boss's portrait. And then you can use it for as many bosses as you want. You can reuse a whole lot of code. And that's your job as a programmer. This first step seems like a lot of code. But the difference between having this one boss and having 50 bosses is not 50 times the work. Because you've done a whole lot of the work already, and you just add a little bit of code for each following boss. Lays a lot of great groundwork that you can build off of later. That's all I got for this episode. If you got any questions, feel free to ask. This has a lot of content in it, and a lot of it is mixed in with those previous episodes. So if you haven't watched those, please go back. Even if you're a little foggy on what we did with Lorem and Magidingle and Dungle even, go back and rewatch those. Make sure you're on the same page. You know what each part of this does without me having to tell you what this is for. Without having to be like, oh, what's Markov chain again? Just get it solidly in your head before you try to do anything too crazy, because you leaving out a single line of this will probably cause all of it to not work. So go in there, make sure you're really solid. If you got questions, you can ask in the comments, but it's even better to ask over on Discord. There are people there who can probably help at least a little. I'm there quite often, and it's a lot easier to share code and get questions answered quickly. So I will see you in the next episode of the Modding of Isaac with Lyte.